Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'll be doing my review and discussion video for my November pick for my African Women Writers project. If you are unfamiliar with this project, I will leave a link to my announcement video as well as my last month's pick, which was Out of Darkness Shining Light by Bettina Gappa, in the cards above as well as in the description box below. As you can see from the title of the video, this month will be discussing The Old Drift by Molly Serpell, and additionally I wanted to remind anyone that's following along with the project that next month's pick will be The Shadow King by Masamin Juste. So before we get into a synopsis of the book as well as a brief biography of Serpell, I did want to make a couple announcements. First of which is, yes, I did get my haircut. I like to have it at this length much better than I liked it at the this length that it was previously. So I did venture out into the world and go to get my haircut. It was very safe. It was a very socially distanced and safe feeling environment, and my mom had been to the hair salon previously and she felt very comfortable there, so I felt comfortable doing that, and I'm glad because now I don't have to get my haircut probably until late next spring or summer, but I do much prefer it at this length than at the very long length that it was previously. And then additionally I do have two announcements related specifically to this project. The first of which is that I am still making my way through New Daughters of Africa, edited by Margaret Busby. This is an anthology of, as the subtitle says, an international anthology of writing by women of African descent. I only have about 250 pages left, just that little chunk. And so I've read quite a bit of this, and we'll be doing a whole review video as well as talking about some of my favorite pieces from this anthology and some of the works that I'm most interested in exploring in the future after reading this anthology. So that whole video will be part of my end of the year videos, and I will kind of include it in this project, put it in the playlist. So I will not be talking about this book in this video nor in the Shadow King's review and discussion video next month, because I'll have a whole separate video talking about this one and some of my reasons why I enjoyed it or potentially didn't enjoy it. I am still really enjoying it. It's a phenomenal anthology, and if you are thinking about picking it up, I would strongly recommend it because I have had a great time and great success with the 700 pages that I've read thus far. So there's the first announcement. The second of which is that I'm definitely planning on doing a full kind of books in conversation with one another review and recap video for this whole project, probably in February of 2021, as the project will continue through January with How Beautiful We Were by Mbola Umbui. That will be my January pick and the last pick for the project as it stands now. But I do want to do a kind of summary of all 7 books that I will have read. How are they conversing with one another? What are the broader themes that I see within these 7 books? And that is in large part because of The Old Drift and how many connections I saw with The Old Drift and some of the other books that I've read for this project. So I will definitely be doing a video about that in February, so it'll be a couple months from now, but I want to finish out reading all the books before I give any broader thoughts on how the books are collaborating and exploring larger themes with one another. So that all being said, let's first get into a brief biography of Molly Serpell. Molly Serpell was born in 1988 in Zambia, but moved to Baltimore with her parents. Her father is a professor. He was a professor at the University of Zambia, and then I assume was a professor somewhere in Baltimore after she moved there when she was 9. She completed her undergraduate degree in American Studies at Yale and a PhD in British and American Literature from Harvard, so she's a very smart lady. After receiving her doctorate, she first began a faculty position at the University of California, Berkeley, where she taught English. However, I do believe she, in according to some basic research I did, is now at Harvard in a faculty position there. She has won a number of awards, both for her short story writing as well as for this book in particular, including being a finalist for the Caine Prize for African Writing, which is a prize that this project has made me familiar with, and then she actually won the prize in 2015. Additionally, this debut novel of hers has won a number of prizes, including the Wendell Campbell Literature Prize, which apparently is one of the wealthiest prizes. You receive $165,000 and it's awarded to 8 people each year. Additionally, she won the Anisfield Wolf Book Award and the Arthur C. Clarke Award. I did find that upon hearing that she won that latter award, she had a short interview with the BBC, as that is a British award, and she talked about donating the prize money to bail funds here in the United States, as immediately upon learning that she'd won that award, she also learned that Breonna Taylor's murderers were not going to be charged for killing Breonna Taylor. So she wanted to kind of support that in some way and had a really interesting tidbit about how that relates to her book that I just wanted to read to you. But it's a very short kind of audio clip, so I will put a link to it down in the description box below if you want to listen to it. It's only about 3 minutes long. So what she said about the old draft during that clip was that the novel is not exactly prophetic, it is just resonant with the questions and issues that have been with me as part of the culture that has formed me. And that culture, I want to say, is one where science fiction is a force that lets us probe real, urgent political questions about equality and power and justice, which is particularly pertinent given that the Arthur C. Clarke Award that she had won the money for is a science fiction prize. So she basically was saying that the science fiction elements of this novel are speaking to the larger truths of society today, particularly regarding the oppression and racism against Black bodies throughout the world. So I thought that was really interesting. She just seems like an absolutely fascinating person. I'm very excited to see where her career takes her. So now moving more directly to The Old Drift. This was published in March of 2019 by Hogarth here in the United States and is a multi-generational genre-bending novel wherein we follow 3 families, beginning first with a prologue in 1904, where a British colonizer by the name of Percy Clarke makes a mistake that sets off a course of events that we then follow these 3 families through all the way until a near future, about 2023, I think. So in the next 550 pages of this novel after the prologue, it's quite a chunky novel. We follow these 3 families, one white, one mixed, and one Black, as they kind of interweave and drift between one another's lives throughout 3 generations of the family. I don't want to say too much more than that because I think the ways in which the plot unfolds is very relevant to kind of the larger discussion that Serpell is making, but that is kind of the basic premise of the novel. With all of that being said, let's jump into my guiding questions. So the first of which is, what are the overall themes of the novel? And I feel like for this particular novel, a better question would be, what themes does this novel not cover? Serpell touches on so many different ideas and themes in this work, particularly the AIDS crisis, space travel, colorism as it's understood and manifests itself within Southern Africa, given the history of Southern Africa and Rhodesia as a place where a lot of British Indian people arrived primarily as workers, in large part on the railroad. We also have the indigenous people there, as well as white people from Europe, both of British descent and also Italian descent, as there was a lot of Italian engineering projects happening in the early 1900s, and there is an Italian grandmother that we follow in this novel. So there's a lot of different hierarchies within the countries of Southern Africa, including but not limited to South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe. So there was a lot of discussion about that element, as well as kind of general family relations and how people interact with one another and romantic and platonic relationships. But I think at the core of this novel, it is truly a critique on colonialism and neo-colonialism through capitalism of Black bodies and Black lives and the kind of continued presence of colonialism in Zambia. So that was the kind of main takeaway that I had, so it really fit quite nicely for this project. Moving on to question number 2, which is, how is colonialism or neo-colonialism discussed in the novel? What role does it have in the narrative? And as I said, this book is entirely about colonialism and neo-colonialism and the ways that colonialism was shaped and transformed by the events over the course of the past century for Zambia, beginning with Zambia being part of Northern Rhodesia and as a British colony, all the way until its independence in 1964, and then continuing on into the present day and the influences of neo-colonial powers such as China and the United States in providing aid for Zambia. There is a interesting science fiction-y turn that takes, but I think it's critiquing and exploring a lot of the very real ways that China impacts Zambia's economy and the economy of Africa more broadly. And the novel really shows how many external forces are continuing to have a presence and have a role in shaping Zambia's policies and the lives of people in Zambia. In the narrative, we first see the kind of colonial mindset and a lot of the racism that comes with that through the prologue of Percy Clarke, but we also see a lot of the early grandmothers, particularly Sibylla, who is an Italian woman who arrives to Zambia, or what was then Northern Rhodesia, in the 1940s, and a lot of the Italian people that Sibylla is involved with reckoning with their rights to Zambia, which, while they were not the colonizers of the time, they had a large role in shaping a lot of the technological developments, and so that was a very fascinating discussion. In the other 2 grandmothers, we also see some more discussion of a newly independent Zambia and the kind of revolutionary ideologies that were helping to shape the country, particularly the influence of Marxism and socialism on early policies in the country that later shifted much more to a kind of neoliberal, globalized approach of interacting with the world economy. And then finally, in the children and grandchildren's perspectives, we see a lot more of neo-colonial influence regarding aid and providing technology and global trade policies, etc., that I think are explored in really fascinating and very unique ways through this science fiction lens. Moving into question number 3, how are women featured in the narrative? Are they the main characters? Are they side characters? Women play a major role in this narrative, particularly in that we follow 3 generations, and the first 2 generations are exclusively women. We follow the grandmothers, the mothers, and then the children. The children, there are 2 male children and then 1 female child who grow up into young adults during that chapter. However, much of the narrative regarding women, I think, really also focuses, in addition to kind of larger commentary on colonialism, the oppression of women and the control of women's bodies that come along with colonialism, capitalism, and the patriarchy. So there's a lot of instances where women's bodies and ideas are controlled by men. For example, one character enters into prostitution, and several of the other characters have a somewhat poorly timed pregnancy that obviously greatly impacts the trajectory of their life. This is particularly true in one of the grandmothers, Martha, who was a member of what was a real thing, which was the Zambia space program that was happening in the 1960s. This was a program that was intended to help put Zambia kind of on the global map by involving the country in this global space race that was happening between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time. And Martha was involved in that and actually was quite a prominent figure within the space program, but unfortunately she gets pregnant, and that obviously sends her life down a hugely different path. So there's a lot of instances of that wherein a female character may have been destined for greatness, but unfortunately having children or being married limited her abilities to do so. Question number 4 is, how is history, particularly the history of families, discussed? And I think while this novel is very focused on families and time, and it is set technically chronologically following, like, beginning first in 1904 and then moving all the way to 2023, I think in part Serpell is exploring here the ways in which time is not always linear, and how sometimes to best understand a moment in history we have to look at it through what's happening in the present or what might happen in the future, which I thought was really fascinating. And I think she does that in part through moving through each generation and having the kind of general generations chapters be all tied together. However, one chapter would end, let's say we have Martha, who is one of the grandmothers, her chapter would end in the 1960s, but then we may move back in time for the next chapter, which would be a different grandmother and potentially would tell the same events but in a much different way. Or in some cases we did not even fully understand what was happening in the first chapter until a later chapter kind of filled in a lot of the more important details for understanding that previous chapter. So I think the way that Serpell is kind of playing with time and chronology in this work is really fascinating, and I haven't fully formed my thoughts on like what she's trying to indicate about history and time, but I just thought that was a really intriguing use of time, particularly given that she starts each new section within a chapter with a year, although that year sometimes is not exactly when that section takes place, or it's not entirely when that section takes place. So there's a lot of intriguing elements regarding time and how history happens that I think was being explored in this novel. And I think this was also enhanced by the science fiction elements that come in the last quarter of the novel. Then finally, question number 5 is, what are your overall thoughts on the novel? And as you can see kind of from how vague I was about this book is incredibly intelligent, it's incredibly dense, and honestly at times I felt like it was almost too smart for me. Like, I don't think I got everything that Serpell was trying to do here. I do think upon reread I may be able to get even more out of this book, but I just think she's too smart for me. Obviously she has a PhD in British American literature, and I think she's using a lot of literary themes and ideas and the canon of Western literature in very interesting ways that I just don't have the literary background or even the historical context of the history of Zambia to fully understand what exactly she was intending with that part of the novel. Throughout the novel, it's narrated by a chorus of mosquitoes that become more complicated as the novel progresses. And while I thought that part was really intriguing, I wasn't entirely sure what it was intending to do. However, with this novel, and I think this is kind of spoiler for my overall recap of this project, I do think this novel helped me realize that sometimes as a reader, we have to understand our own limitations and how sometimes things are not intended for us, or sometimes we don't have the appropriate background to really understand what the author is trying to do here. And that's not a fault of the book, that's a fault of us as a reader, or that's a limitation we have as a reader. And I really felt that with this novel. I could tell that so much was happening, but sometimes I was just like, so much is happening to the fact that I don't actually entirely know what's going on. Additionally, I did find myself, whenever I wasn't reading the novel, being like, I don't know if I'm fully ready to be pulled back in. But then as soon as I was reading it, I was so drawn into the story. Serpell is such a detailed writer. She just pulls and uses history and characterization in really fascinating ways, which I found to be really engaging when I was reading it. But then I think just the project that this book was made it difficult sometimes for me to want to return to it. Additionally, I do think sometimes the characters blended together a little bit. Particularly, there's some side characters that are present throughout the story and are connected to characters that we never see them interact necessarily, but we know that they're family members, and I had a difficult time keeping track of those characters and how they were all connected. Luckily, there is a family tree at the very beginning of the novel, which I looked at pretty much constantly because I was always a little confused as to who was who, and I kind of wish that had been fleshed out just a little bit more, so the side characters that are not the main like 9 characters we follow would have also been included, so I could get a better sense of like who those characters were. I also think this would make for a phenomenal TV show. I think there was a lot here that would be visually very intriguing, and I also do think in a TV show I would maybe understand a little bit more of what was going on. So that is just a personal preference of mine, but overall this is definitely a novel of epic proportions, definitely an intense reading project, and I think not a novel that most people would get along with. I think you have to be very interested in literary fiction, in history of African politics and the history of Africa more broadly, and have a good knowledge base for both of those things to really understand everything that's happening in this novel. However, if you do have kind of an interest or knowledge in both of those things, I think this novel is definitely worth it, and I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. I would have given it 4.5 stars or even 5 stars, but just the lack of understanding I sometimes had, and also the lack of compulsion to continue reading sometimes did bring my rating down just a little bit. So yeah, that was The Old Drift. I would love if you have read this novel to discuss it with you down in the comment section below. This is definitely a novel that I think is worth discussing with other people and getting alternate perspectives on things, as there's a lot going on here, a lot to unpack. I mean, as I said previously, this novel is almost 600 pages and it is dense. It is a lot of information to take in and a lot of things to keep track of, and so I think if you were to read this, if you've not already, having someone else to talk to about it may be a really great way to go about it. So I think that is everything for this video. If you have found my channel through this video, I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe. Of course, do talk to me in the comment section down below if you are interested in now reading this book, or as I said previously, if you've read it already. And I hope you're having a great rest of your day whenever you're watching this, and I will talk to you next time.